Susan, OMG, my friend. I'm already so excited about the chat box.
And I'm feeling pressure to dance more like you. So I'm looking up and you're going like this. So by the end of this, I'm going to be dancing. Before we go much further, we do want to make an apology. Cast made a scheduling error, and we want to recognize that today is Yom Kippur. So we apologize for the error. This webinar is being recorded and will be sent out to all registrants so they can have asynchronous access. However, if anybody feels like they've missed out, if you're watching it as a recording and you're thinking, I really wanted to put a question in the chat, or I really wanted to say hi to Kelli, you'll have access to our email addresses, and we'd love to hear from you, and we're happy to hear from you. So please know we apologize, and we will make ourselves available.
Thanks for saying that, Susan. I'll go ahead and introduce myself. Again, I'm trying not to look at the chat box when I look over to the right because I want to spend all my time there right now. So all over the world, Susan, I wish we had our microphones so we could okay, New Zealand, let me hear how you speak. So, hi friends, I am Kelli Suding. I'm so excited to be here. Collaborating with Susan has been one of my all-time favorites this entire year as my new position at the National Center on Accessible Educational Materials. So we're here to talk all things literacy, UDL, AIM and AT, our favorite things. So thanks so much for being here on this Monday afternoon, morning, night, wherever you're at.
Yeah, and I'm Susan Shapiro. I work at CAST on the professional learning team and teach educators all over the world about universal design for learning. And one of the things that I think I try to remind people about, maybe one of the top three things, is that universal design for learning is for each and every learner. And that includes learners who are sometimes denied access to general education spaces. Universal design for learning gives those general educators and those special educators more capacity to design those spaces, so they're designed for everybody. So I'm really excited that part of what we're going to be thinking about today is some of the barriers that stand in the way of our thinking about literacy instruction for all, and really defining all as everyone.
So we want to start off just making sure that we have our accessibility commitment to you. We are talking about accessibility. So you're going to notice that Susan and I's slides are not super fancy and cute, even though being former teachers, we love all of those cute fonts and all of the fun stuff. We know that can be the barrier to accessing the text or our slides. So you're going to notice that all of our slides are perceivable. They're all principles of POUR. So you're going to see POUR. We have alt text on our images. You're going to notice high contrast or readable font. We'll have captions on. So if you need to use those captions, please turn those on in Zoom for you. All of our videos have captions. We have distinct titles, shortened links, understandable, clear structure and outline throughout the whole time, and robust. We've checked for accessibility. I will say I did one last minute check and I've got just a couple more errors that I'm going to fix on those slides before you save them for the rest of your days to use for your own resource. And we would love to have you contribute to this conversation beyond Zoom. Feel free to, you do have access to us. We have used that chat box and engage with us, go back and forth with, oftentimes a lot of the best professional learning experiences from the chat box. We're just here as facilitators, friends. So please use that chat box. And then also the Q&A, and we're going to try our best to get hands-on and get through all of those. Share on social media. If you're on Twitter or X, we're not really sure where you're coming from with which one. Follow our handles and use those two hashtags, UDL Now or hashtag AEM for all, Facebook, wherever we can, to collaborate and grow our own professional learning network, because we would absolutely love to learn from you. And you can see, you can access our resources. We put that resource page in the chat box many a times. I just want to show you what it looks like. This is what it looks like, and it'll take you here. And this is the link to the slides. And we also have all of the webinar resources here. And we have a ton of friends. We have so many resources for you at the end of the slides that are extra for you to contact us and reach out.
And you may be here because you are on CAS's mailing list, and so you got an announcement about this webinar. But if you're not, you'll see a link there on that digital handout to joining CAS mailing list. We'd love to have you and share with you what we're doing, what's coming up, and things that you can attend. All right, so the goals. The goal for this hour together are for all of us, no matter our starting point, to understand a little bit more about barriers to literacy learning not being in students, but in our instructional designs, in our policies, in our practices, and sometimes even in some habituated beliefs. And we can remove those barriers by one, working together, right? Collaborating and thinking together and using universal design for learning as a framework for that thinking and collaboration. There is a center at the University of North Carolina. It's the Center for Literacy and Disability Studies. And David Yoder is the former director of that center. And he says, no child is too anything to read and write. That literacy is an essential human skill that all children, right? We'll talk about this in a moment, but there's no prerequisite to having access to literacy instruction.
I love that statement so much, Susan.
Okay, now, if you can't stay for the full hour, or if you're inclined to just want the main idea right at the top, I'm going to just share with you a summary of what we're going to be talking about and digging in cognitively to in this next hour. There are 3 myths, and there are 3 ways that we are going to suggest that we use universal design for learning to really shift those myths. The first myth that I'll be talking about is that we think about students with disabilities sometimes, and sometimes all students, and many students, any students, as just not being able to access the literacy instruction. And in doing so, it's almost like we see the barrier as being the capacity or the prerequisite skills of the learner. And we don't say it, but we sort of think it sometimes, and we cross our fingers and say, I hope that someday, right, they can have more ability to know more about, and then, right, then maybe they can access that literacy instruction. But what if we use universal design for learning to not to change that instruction, right? Rather than changing the learner or hoping that the learner comes with different skills and abilities, we change the learning, right? And we say, let's provide multiple options, right? Multiple means for learners to engage with this literacy instruction, multiple means for learners to, multiple representations of this literacy content, multiple ways for learners to physically navigate, communicate, organize, and manage their literacy learning. And universal design for learning, many of you know it well, and many of you may not know what I'm talking about, but universal design for learning is a framework that really scaffolds the cognition for teachers of doing that kind of design. The second myth we're going to talk about is about prerequisites to learning. I think sometimes, at least this is my experience, and I don't know if you have had different experiences, but unfortunately, sometimes in my experience, I've noticed that if a student does not rely fully on speech to communicate, there is some kind of discount placed on their perceived capacity for literacy instruction, almost as if being able to speak is a prerequisite to having access and engaging with literacy. We know, though, that the Universal Design for Learning guidelines give us the power to and the reminder to provide all students with multiple means for action and expression. There are lots of ways to physically navigate literacy learning. There are lots of ways to express and communicate thinking and understanding about, texts, and to communicate thinking, and lots of ways to remain focused and goal-directed, and to employ those executive functions. The third myth, Kelli will talk through, and that is about AT, right? That somehow when students do have access to literacy instruction, it's kind of a bummer that they have to use assistive technology, or they're not really reading the text because they're using assistive technology. We're going to really try, Kelli's just covering her eyes, like, no, don't say it. We're going to really try to debunk that myth. AT is power, AT is access, and AT, assistive technology, is agency. And universal design for learning reminds us that, that is really the goal of UDL. The goal of UDL is not to use the guidelines. The goal of UDL is to use the guidelines to do two things: make sure every learner has access to learning, and the agency of every learner is honored in that learning design.
So we wanted to come right and just talk about the definition of literacy. And we want you to just take note of some things that we do say, and not the only one thing that is said. So literacy, the ability to identify, understand, interpret, create, compute, and communicate using friends, visual, audible, and digital materials across disciplines in any context. The one change I would add here is if it said and accessible digital materials, but we're going to talk about that. So the definition of literacy, you notice it's not just listed visual. So just park that in your brains for now until as we talk throughout this whole session.
I'm going to just spend a moment giving you a little bit of an opportunity to gain some background knowledge about universal design for learning, because it is something we're going to reference throughout this time. So we're just going to do a little bit of a thinking activity if you know UDL, this will prime the pump, and if you don't, it will just be a small introduction. So to do so, I'm going to read a teacher reflection, right? A teacher describing what she or he might call this problem of practice. And I'm going to ask you to reflect either on your own. If you're driving, that's a really good option, or to add ideas to the chat, the Zoom chat, or maybe if you're with other people, just to turn and chat with people that you are near. This teacher says, students just do not seem engaged. They're not completing the assigned reading outside of class, and they do not participate in our class discussions. What advice do you have for this teacher? Imagine this teacher is new to teaching. What advice do you have for this teacher? Again, we'll just, you can use the chat, or if you stay there for a second, Kelly, use the chat, reflect. We'll just take about 1 minute.
Susan, I really appreciate the options that you've put out here on here to reflect on your own. You can add to the chat or just discuss with someone nearby. I love having those choices.
And thanks for the things coming through the chat. I see, is the material culturally relevant? Like, what is it that we're asking learners to read? And is my life represented anywhere in this text? Thank you for that. Have the students use technology so they something that they already have a high engagement with? Thank you. Can the students have a choice about how they access the text? A choice about what they read? Ask students why they're not engaged with the reading.
Yes.
What are the standards? Have you considered why this is happening? The chat is moving faster than I can read it. Is the material meaningful and relevant? Who are the students? Right. So many great questions. Provide multiple options for engagement to get to know your learners, right? So that there's something happening that's getting in the way of these students engaging with this text and engaging with these class discussions. And I think I saw up there too, why do you have to be able to prove that you read a text or show your thinking and understanding by speaking in a large group? Is that the only way to demonstrate your thinking and understanding? If I were to stop the webinar, which I'm not going to do, and read every single thing in the chat, I feel confident that there's one thing I wouldn't see, and that is, well, the students need to try harder, or the students just need to get motivated, or the students need more literacy skills, or the students need to be better organized. Nobody is seeing the barrier in the learner. Everyone is saying, let's think, what can we change? How can we change this learning so that students have more access, right? How can we change this content to make it more culturally relevant? How can we think about the access to this text in a more accessible way? Universal design for learning, if you go to that next slide, Kelly, is a framework that really helps us to anticipate and design for human variability in learning. And it gives us a little bit of a set of reminders. It summarizes learning variability and helps us to direct our attention to aspects of design that will help us to make learning accessible and help us to build learner agency. So just a little taste of universal design for learning. Even if you don't know about UDL, you used it just now to think a little bit about how you might support that teacher.
Yes, and the chat box is so great. I see so many participants talking about just asking the student. That student voice is so important. And the chat box is so great. If someone asks about saving the chat, we just want you to know, just click on those 3 dots by the emoji in the chat box and you'll be able to save that chat at the end. We need to remember to try to save that. Miss McKenzie, if you're still here.
Yes, we will absolutely save that chat and send it out afterwards, along with the recording.
Perfect.
Some of you may know that CAST is really excited and working really hard to do some revision of the UDL guidelines. And the question driving that revision work is around systemic barriers to learning, like racism and ableism. So you can follow that work by jumping on our website, and the guidelines page has some, and I'll add that to the digital handout as well if it's not already there. But something that's not changing are these core concepts, these underlying principles that really guide our thinking when we apply UDL to practice. And I'm just going to name the 3 of them before we move on. The first is that learner variability is the norm. It's not like some learners learn differently. We all learn differently. Human brains are as unique as human fingerprints. Learner variability is predictable and we can design for it in the same way that if I ever had a dinner party, right, I could predict and anticipate the variability in the human diet, right? We can predict, we know something about the variability in our students, and so we can proactively think about that and design for it. And that we've talked about this, the barriers are in designs, not learners. All right. So this brings us to the first myth. And the first myth is just one that I'm really glad to have a chance to talk to so many of you about. That is that some students are just not really ready to access literacy instruction. Just, the way that the instruction is just doesn't seem like they're going to be able to access it, given that they don't and they can't and they seldom. I'm going to tell you a little story about my first job teaching. I was a special education teacher in a self-contained classroom, and I had young children. And the design of this school system was that every once in a while, if somebody deemed it appropriate, my special education class would be mainstreamed into an elementary school that was right next door. And the reason that my students were not allowed to be in that elementary school was because they didn't have what the teacher said were, the appropriate skills, the appropriate reading and writing and math skills. I was a brand new teacher. I think I was 22 at the time. You can go to the next slide. And the special education director suggested that I might want to develop a curriculum. And so in my little red schoolhouse, I was in New Hampshire, where I am today, with my class, and it's a darling little building, but it was a very segregated setting. She handed me this book, and I still have it today as a reminder. It's called Teaching the Moderately and Severely Handicapped, and it's a book of curriculum. There are 2 volumes, and I just want to show you the table of contents for those volumes. This is what she was recommending that I use to develop the curriculum for students who had labels like cerebral palsy and Down syndrome. Volume 1 was self-care skills, gross motor skills, fine motor and pre-vocational skills, household management and living skills. Volume 2, communication, socialization, safety, and leisure time skills. And I saved this book because it's a great reminder that there was no literacy. What was it that made that the developers of this text, with all due respect, whoever they are, that we weren't thinking as a field that students with developmental disabilities would need literacy? It was our intention that they have access to functional skills, but is there anything more functional in your life than the capacity to use literacy? So this first myth is really just this idea that learners need to be different before they have access to literacy instruction. And what UDL can help us do is change that literacy instruction by making it more flexible, making it more customizable, giving learners more options for becoming interest, perceiving content, and physically navigating. So that's the end of myth one, and we're going to move on to the second myth now.
And Susan, before you move on to the second myth, there is one question in the chat that I wanted to draw attention to. Let me just pull it up. It is, what do we do if our state assessments do not reflect this mindset, especially in reading across all grade levels? Some curriculum specialists have the mindset that using the read and write extension is only for those who have IEPs and 504s because they are the ones who have access to them on testing. Therefore, the use of these tools do not trickle down to our general education population.
So when I put my hand up, I'm pointing up to Kelli above me. So Kelli, I'm going to give you this one.
So we hear those concerns, those valid concerns, almost on a daily basis. And so when we think about accessibility, we think about assistive technology accessing the instruction. And we're also talking about universal design for learning. One thing I do say is keep working, keep doing the next right thing in making those changes, but also just be mindful that testing is only a certain amount of days of the whole year. So we need to have, if our students are engaged in the curriculum, all the other days that they're not testing, because they've been able to use those tools to support their learner, they're going to perform better on those tests. So we're not teaching to the test. It's all about having them access all the days when they're not testing, because that's maybe something that we can't change right now. So the one thing that we do have control over is making sure that our students have access to the curriculum. And if that comes down to an accessible technology, assistive technology, we support them all those other days. And it's a really hard, it's a question that I feel like we could do a whole hour session on, or maybe a week, just talking about that in general. Susan and I have had numerous conversations about assessment and accessibility. So just don't give up on our students. This is about access. Just think about the days we have control over, making sure they have access in the way that they learn during those times that they can.
And I'm going to piggyback on that word access. On the screen, you see the UDL guidelines, and there's a circle around the top horizontal row, which we refer to as the access row. These are the guidelines that say, make sure students can physically access the text, make sure that they can perceive the content, make sure that they have a way of becoming interested in the learning. And Kelli, if you would just in the next slide, define accessibility for us, because we're going to be using that word so much today.
Yeah, and I think accessibility, sometimes we automatically think maybe our physical space, but we're really going to focus on accessibility when it comes just to in the classroom. No, just access to literacy. This is the topic. I'm trying not to get on my soapbox, Susan, about accessibility in the big sense. So let's think about our instruction. Okay, so put your mind on thinking about the materials that we're giving our students. So this is the definition of accessibility from the Office of Civil Rights. So this is what it says: a person with a disability can acquire the same information, can engage in the same interactions, and enjoy the same services in an equally effective, equally integrated manner with substantially equivalent ease of use as a person without a disability. If you noticed a word that perhaps I repeated, please put that in the chat box, just so we can save that. It's the same. It doesn't mean we're modifying materials. Just it's how our students are going to access that content is going to be different, and that's okay. So accessibility. Yes, shout it. People are putting same in all caps, Susan. You see that? They're yelling at us. That's right. Same. Thanks, friends.
All right. So the second myth is about using speech and our tendency sometimes to assume that when somebody does not rely on speech fully or doesn't use speech, that they're not eligible for literacy instruction. I'm going to tell you a story, and if you've heard me tell this story before, I apologize, but I made a promise to a student that I would tell this story every time I had an opportunity to talk with teachers, and it really fits here today in this webinar because it's where I learned something that I just never want to forget. So here it is. These are old stories I'm telling you, my first year teaching, and this is even before that. This is when I was a student teacher. I happened to go overseas, and I was working at an international school that was like K-12, and the head of the school said, I was a third grade classroom teacher. I'm sorry, third grade classroom teacher as a student teacher. And the head of the school came in and said, hey, we have a student at the high school who's being mainstreamed. And you heard me sort of describe mainstreaming, right? Is that idea like you can go in here now, but not now. And you can have access to the general education curriculum here because we think you might get something out of it. To me, those are some of the most dangerous words that we say in schools, as if we can make those predictions. And probably not for a biology class, but maybe for the pumpkin party. So the student was being mainstreamed, and they didn't want her to miss the opportunity because it was the only time she was in the general education classroom during the week. So I said I would take care. I would fill in for the paraeducator who was out that day. And of course I said yes, because I was a student teacher. You do everything when you're a student teacher, right? Recess duty, lunch duty. And I met Tina. I was told she had cerebral palsy. When I met her, it seemed like she had cerebral palsy. She didn't say anything to me. She didn't reply when I said things to her. I looked at the art curriculum, and the teacher was talking about, students becoming more skillful at noticing detail in a visual image and then recreating that detail. I guess really the goal was not to recreate it, but to see it. And so they had to take a full page magazine ad, tear it in half, and then use colored pencils to fill in the other side. And because I thought, oh, they want me here right now because I'm, a special educator or almost a special educator in my university program, I put on my special education hat. And I thought, Tina can't do that, right? She can't do that. I need to make a modification. And so I thought she wouldn't be able to use that small 8.5 by 11 paper. I got her a page of chart paper like I had used in my third grade classroom for songs and chants and things. And I didn't think she would be able to use those fine, those colored pencils. So I thought, well, I'll get her some of those big, thick crayons. It was a K-12 school. The art room had lots of materials. So I got her those crayons that are so thick, you can hardly break them if you try. And I said, what I hope I'll never say again, but I said, why don't you color? And so she did. And she put some marks on the page. Tina didn't have control of her muscles to make fine little marks, but she made kind of larger marks on the page. I moved away. I gave her some time without me hovering. That was something I did right. When I came back, I noticed the marks. I said something about how the colors were beautiful. And I looked up at the clock and I saw like I have 41 minutes left. So I thought I need to, say something else here, do something else. And I set the lowest high expectation I hope I will ever set. And I said, I love all the colors. Maybe you could make a rainbow. And then I ate it and faded again. And she made the red and she made the purple. And when I came back, and all the while, we had no conversation. She didn't speak. She made a couple of sounds. When I came back, this is what I saw on her page. She had written, I am bored. I was almost done with a university program in special and general education. And I'm embarrassed, but I think it's important to tell you that I didn't think at this point in my time of becoming a teacher, because Tina didn't speak, I didn't think she could read or write or spell or capitalize or underline the most important word in the sentence. She wrote, I am bored. And she underlined the word bored. So the first thing I did was I apologized. And I don't know that we do that often enough when we kind of make wrong design decisions, right? Like I made a decision about this based on some faulty thinking, and I'm sorry. And then I asked her if I could have the page because I wanted to teach other people. And I didn't have this language at the time. I think I called it high expectations, but I wanted to teach other people about high expectations, or what I came to understand as the presumption of competence. The presumption of competence is something that I learned from the work of Doug Bicklin, who's at the University of Syracuse. And I pull this excerpt from his work. The presumption of competence does not require the teacher's ability to prove its existence or validity in advance. Rather, it's a stance, an outlook, a framework for educational engagement. Sometimes we think about, and you may have heard the language of the theory of the least dangerous assumption, right? The presumption of competence is the theory of the least dangerous assumption, because if you assume, right, that somebody does have the capacity to understand what you're saying, even if you don't know, you don't have that data, right, that says, oh, she understands or they understand, and you continue to engage as if the person does, if ever you find out that you were wrong, there is no harm done. But when we wait for students and people to like show us these prerequisite skills or whatever it is that we're waiting for or testing for before we give them access to learning, and then if we were to find out they had those skills all along, right, we would lose, that student would lose years of education and a lot of dignity as well. So the presumption of competence is so essential in this work of thinking about literacy instruction. Just to summarize, literacy is power, and learners who don't rely fully on speech or who may not communicate in ways that we can predict and understand still need access to literacy instruction. And universal design for learning has a whole principle about this. The third column, right, that if you go to that next slide, Kelly, the third principle of universal design for learning really reminds us, like, provide multiple means of action and expression, options for physical action, options for navigating those materials and spaces in varieties of ways, options for expression and communication, and options for employing those executive functions.
Yes. So the importance of high expectations. Susan, I have heard you talk about that story, and it gives me goosebumps every time. I really appreciate it. I think that we all have our story. Everyone in here probably has a story, and that's why you're here. Just hear and learn. We can learn from you, and we all have that story. But the most important thing is those high expectations for our kids, because our students, because they definitely feel that. My story, failing forward, was, and you've heard me present, you've heard me talk about this, was my student, 5th grade student, who my expectations were that he would not be able to do the directions to this math test on his own. So I did a lot of talking. We sat down, lots of talking. I talked for like 10 minutes about the instructions and was super animated. And he could have done it had he just had maybe text to speech, that assistive technology tool for him to be able to read the directions as many times as he needed, as fast or as slow as he needed. Except me, I became the barrier. And when I became the barrier, I knew that I was a barrier. When I said, okay, are you ready to do this, this math assignment? And he looked at me, he said, are you growing a mustache? like he was looking at me way too close, friends. I was like, no, but I became the barrier. And that was definitely a shift. I was not providing him what he needed that to be accessible for a way that he interact, decode, engage in that content. So high expectations here. We love this video.
Training fleas requires a glass jar with a lid. The fleas are placed inside the jar, and the lid is then sealed. They are left undisturbed for 3 days. Then, when the jar is opened, the fleas will not jump out. In fact, the fleas will never jump higher than the level set by the lid. Their behavior is now set for the rest of their lives. And when these fleas reproduce, their offspring will automatically follow their example.
So friends, let's not be the lid. We'll just leave it at that. So myth, using assistive technology for literacy instruction is cheating. If you have experienced this statement, please put that in the chat box. Share anything you've experienced. Maybe we can talk through together. But this is one of the big things that we hear about, is that, oh, I want them to read it by themselves. Oh, that's cheating. That's not fair. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. But in starting that, we want to just give a little bit of background on accessibility in general when it comes to our instruction. So, and we always show this video. I do all of the time. So you're welcome. If you've seen this like 20 times, you're welcome because you're going to see it again. Does anyone feel like
this man right here is my great grandfather? He's the first cat herder in our family.
Herding cats. Don't let anybody tell you it's easy.
Anybody can herd cattle. Holding together 10,000 half-wild short hairs, well, that's another thing altogether.
Being a cat herder is probably about the toughest thing I think I've ever done.
I got this one this morning, right here, and if you look at his face, it's just ripped to shreds, you know?
You see the movies, you hear the stories, I'm living a dream. Not everyone can do what we do.
I wouldn't do nothing else.
It ain't an easy job, but when you bring a herd into town and you ain't lost a one of them, ain't a feeling like it in the world.
Yeah, so some of us may feel that when we work in education. All of our students we're thinking about learner variability. We need to get to the same place, but how everyone gets there different. And when students, the instruction that we're giving them or the environment or thinking about those principles of universal design for learning, when those pieces are missing, we feel like we have to stop what we're doing, get the student here, get the student here to get them all in one place. But students have those tools where they can be have as much independence as they can in accessing the content, the better. So hopefully after we talk about this, you can share this video if you have those people who say that AT is cheating, and then just talk about ways that we get all of our students to the same goal in a way that looks a little bit more independent. And Susan, if you can chime in on that, if you want to.
I was going to chime in, but I got distracted in the chat. There are these amazing stories coming through about sad stories, right? Stories that prove to us that we all need to hold hands tightly and keep working on this, but stories where people are seeing assistive technology as cheating, just like you're talking about. Yeah, something
which is what
wanted me to say here.
Yeah, just that go
Right.
teach. So we're gonna bring this in. So access for all learners. Susan really talked deeply about talking about UDL. So access for all learners. We have universal design for learning. We have to think about accessibility. We have to think about our instruction, our accessible education materials, accessible technologies, and the assistive technology. And all those pieces have to work together, friends, in order for our students to have full access from the start to the finish. So I have a GIF image here where you push an automatic button to open the door, and then it goes to stairs. Okay, so thinking about when we're creating our instruction, whatever our students need access to, if it's accessible from the start to the finish, because oftentimes what happens is if we have any one of those pieces missing for our students, we oftentimes see a lot of behaviors. That could be Johnny, who's going into math class, who you're prepared every day for Johnny to be really upset, throw his pencil, maybe take his shoes off and throw them, and you're prepared for that, okay? Because you know something's going on in math. But maybe in English class, Johnny has access to text to speech, so he's auditorily reading. But in math class, the math teacher thinks, oh, they don't need those tools, we're doing math. So this is when we see a lot of those behaviors. So if behavior is predictable, it's preventable. So don't put on your catcher's mask, all of your pads, waiting for math because you know Johnny's going to be upset. This is the time where we can be proactive in ensuring that Johnny has access to all of those tools that he needs in all four walls of the classroom, in every classroom, in all environments, even outside of school. So if behavior is predictable, friends, it's definitely preventable. So accessible materials, we're talking about AIM. So that is print and technology-based educational tools that are designed and enhanced to reach the broadest range of learners. So thinking about learner variability. So this is text that can also be print. We can make it digital, accessible digital, graphic, an audio format or video, whatever that student needs to be able to take charge of their own learning, and ensuring that we're making accessible education materials. So I'll keep saying AIM when I'm referring to that. And then we have accessible formats. So the formats within AIM. So these are the different formats. So it's an alternative manner or form that gives that eligible person access to the curriculum. As a student without a disability has access. The student may need that form. Maybe it's text to speech, maybe it's speech to text, maybe it's the contrast, maybe it's enlarging the text. Having those options, but that can only happen if we're giving our students accessible formats. So that is our digital textbook, workbooks, trade books, all materials that our students are accessing, ensuring that we have that accessible format. And so when we have those students who use assistive technology, it's any piece of equipment or whatever, whether acquired, commercially modified, or customized, that essentially can increase the functional capabilities of a child with disabilities. Okay, so assistive technology. And this is when it becomes assistive technology. We're writing this in our students' IEP to ensure that they're getting access in all of those subjects, all day long when they need access to text. This is not us doing read aloud accommodations, having us pull them out of class, reading everything to them. Because remember, friends, I was asked if I was growing a mustache because I did the wrong, I did not provide things accessible for my student. So when those things work, just remember that GIF that I showed you with the automatic door opens to the stairs. When AIM works, this is from the start to the finish for our students to access those materials. Our materials must be accessible. The technology that the materials are being uploaded on must be accessible as well, meaning that the technology can be directly used with or without AT, assistive technology. So it has the built-in the features, that accessible technology, and then assistive technology. When students need those accommodations, that's the hardware software used by students with disabilities to match their functional needs, whether it's physical access, for learning, sensory, all of those three pieces must work together. So this doesn't mean that you scan a document and it's a PDF and the student opens it up on the Chromebook. There's more steps to that to ensure that that's accessible for students who can access that. So accommodations versus modifications. So accommodations are what we're talking about when we think about AIM, when we talk about accessible technologies and assistive technology. It doesn't change the curriculum at all, friends. It's only how the student is going to access and express their knowledge about that content is going to be different. And then modification is what lowers that expectations. That's how Susan talked about her previous student. So we're lowering those expectations, and essentially we're changing and customizing the curriculum for that student, and just not presuming competence in their knowledge because they're unable to show you what they know because things are not accessible for them to have options to be able to show you what they know and gain that
I'll
knowledge.
jump in here, Kelly, just for a second,
Yes,
just to
please
say
do.
this question is in the Q&A, and I think it might be good to answer before we go much further. I want to summarize it because it's a long question, but it's a great one. I think the picture that comes in my mind when I read the question is, we've got a student who may not be able to decode the text as it is, and so we use assistive technology, and now they can be part of the conversation about friendship in the book and the theme of the story and in the great discussion and all the activities associated. But what about learning to read? What about learning to decode those words? How does assistive technology make sure that we're not just saying, you don't need to read, we'll just keep giving you access to the text?
Yes, thanks for bringing that up because that's why a lot of people say, I want my student to learn to read, right? Your students are still learning to read. So the assistive technology does not replace teaching. It is parallel with the skills that we are teaching, the literacy skills that we are still teaching. It comes into play when it's those independent tasks instead of if they are to read, let's just say they're supposed to read chapter 1 of a certain book that's assigned in class, and decoding's the barrier. Text to speech is what's going to be used. Someone's not going to, if decoding's the barrier, and yet they're supposed to show, do an assignment on the first chapter, they must have access to that, the text to that first chapter. So that's where assistive technology comes into play. It's parallel for those independent tasks while we're still working on the skills of reading. It doesn't replace, friends, at all. It's not replacing. It's parallel with the skills when students need to access the content when we're not actually teaching those specific decoding skills. And friends, it's the law. Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, it's the law, focuses on accessible formats of print instruction materials for qualifying students in a timely manner. So a timely manner means at the same time as their peers. So just be mindful of that. And so when I think about assistive technology, I think lack of intelligence is not lack of knowledge is not lack of intelligence, right? Well, it's not. So if students need opportunities to gain that knowledge, so then they can express what they know to get that knowledge. So accommodations look like this, and all of the points that we've talked about so far. I feel myself talking fast because we're running low on time. We had tons of slides, but we're all good. Universal design for learning, that's the choice built into the environment. So the accommodations look like this. Accessible educational materials, it's the same content, but it's in an accessible format. And then the accessible and assistive technology, those are differing ways of accessing, interacting, and responding to that same content. So that's the outline of what those accommodations look like. And this is a great example of a young man and who will display it, who's going to blow out his candle.
Oh my goodness.
His
right
birthday.
Here, right there. Look.
What trying.
You're going to open your mouth and
blow
blow.
Out his candle.
Do it.
trying so hard.
Hold on.
Dad walks away.
Slow down, Daddy. Slow down.
Slow down. So Dad comes back with the accommodation of the
Okay.
straw.
Stop.
There. Ready? Blow. There you go. Yay!
Wow.
Good job, buddy.
Now eat it.
Now eat it. The accommodation's a straw. His kiddo could blow out his own candle. Dad could have gotten real close to his kiddo and said 1, 2, 3, and then he actually blows out the candle, right? So just think about ways our students can access their instruction, having those opportunities to be independent. And that's where we can come in with assistive technology. Assistive technology bringing access and agency for our learners. And so the greatest predictor of reading growth is just time spent reading. Text to speech is considered time spent reading. Having captions on it is considered time spent reading. Friends, if you have struggling readers or just for visual attention and focus, turn on captions. That's considered time spent reading. And that's the only way our students are going to become better readers is if they have that time spent reading. So we're only going to do a couple of these activities, Susan, just for time, but we know we have like 15 minutes left. But before we go any further, we want you to answer this question, okay? If you don't answer it, you have to leave. And the end's the best part, so you're not going to be able to stay. Sorry about you. Here we go. You have like 5 seconds. I put it in the chat box. 5, 4. Put your answer in the chat box, friends. Oh my gosh, Susan, we're not going to have anyone left here. Okay. Yes, now someone's just trying. Try harder. You're going to lose recess if you do not just read the sentence. Oh my gosh, come on.
Look at the words.
People are just seem like Sue and Will. Still waiting. 3, 2, 1. The guesses are amazing. No, everyone's going to have to leave and you lose recess. Now, the question is, what is your age? Do you all know your age? Now, we're not going to ask you to put your age in there because I don't want to put mine. No, I'm kidding. What is your age? That is, what is your age in a different language? I love the chat. So was that a fair assessment of your knowledge? You know, most of you probably know what age you are, unless you want to forget it. You know, was it a fair assessment? No, it was not a fair assessment. If that was that a fair assessment of that specific language? Absolutely. So just think about your ability to respond to the content. No, that was not a fair assessment of your knowledge. So when you think about students who decoding is the barrier, but you are reading everything aloud to them with text to speech, they can answer the questions. It's not a fair assessment when you give a student extra time and just say, just try harder, sound it out, chunk it out, when decoding is the barrier. And then you're like, well, if I read it to you, and this is when our students get labeled, you're just being lazy, right? You're just being lazy. Okay, you have 5 seconds. You may or may not win money for this, okay? Your picture may or may not be on the CAS website. I don't know, but you have 5 seconds. With your non-dominant hand, I want you to type your first and last name in the chat box. You have 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Oh my gosh, like 4 people followed the rules, Susan. Can you believe these students? This is embarrassing. You people are being lazy. I'm kidding. I apologize, but it's all on purpose why we're saying that. I really don't think you're lazy. But this is how our students feel. Let's think about that. I didn't prep you. I love that people are still trying to type. Now it's becoming nonsense. Lack of executive functioning skills. I didn't give you any processing time. You didn't know what the expectation was. Why couldn't you just use speech to text? What am I measuring? Was I measuring typing? You have no idea. This is when our students start getting really ticked off, right? Because it's like, wait, what? What? I'm so confused. You're not prepared. Essentially, I set you up for failure. So decoding the content, friends, and interacting with and responding to the content are all different skill sets. This is what I mean by that. A student could be a junior in high school who's beginning reading levels first grade, but their comprehension level is a grade level or above. I saw some in the comments mentioning students just like that. This is a student who should have access to grade level curriculum because it's just decoding's the barrier. It's not comprehension. Again, AT aligned. So this would be a prime student to have the use of text to speech. And let me tell you, no matter what subject you teach, let's just say this, it's a test. Every single test or assessment that you friends are giving your students, there's two barriers. There's two things being tested first before they can even get to the curriculum. The first is a test of accessibility or engagement. Can my student interact with this paper and pencil? Does my student have their glasses? That's the first barrier. And then, friends, it's a test of reading. Every single test or assessment you give a student, it's a test of reading. If your student cannot decode those directions to that math test, they're never going to be able to show you what they know. Okay, it's not cheating, it's equitable. And that's just how that specific student learns. For sake of time, I'm going to go through here, but just knowing that 20% of the world's population has symptoms of dyslexia, learning disability. This graphic here really breaks it down for you, and you have access to that. And I really encourage you to go through there and look at that. And then reading and speaking, we have to have, phonemic awareness, vocabulary, word meaning, grammatical structure, and, to be able to connect our sentences. This is super fluid for us, but it's not like that for everyone, and that's okay. And we were going to do a game here, but we don't have time. But one thing I do want to encourage you, look up your state, and if you're not in the States, look up where your school district and find out the percent of fourth graders who are not proficient in reading. This particular state, Black 78%, Latino 71%, white 56%. We challenge you to look up that and just ponder that. We're going to leave that there. These are our students who are probably getting further behind. They don't have those accommodations while they're doing those independent tasks, and students are still going to continue to be further behind. Mad gaps is so much fun of decoding. We don't have time, do we, Susan? We don't have time. We have time for one. Okay, this is the rules. Part 1, I'm going to read this aloud, and I want you to put in the chat box. Okay, I love this chat so much. I'm going to read this aloud. Put the answer in the chat box, 10 seconds. A straight A student. A straight A student. What am I saying? A straight A student. Oh, look at that. Under 10 seconds. A lot of a straight A student. Yes. Look at you. Straight A students getting that so fast. Okay, now, perfect. Now I want you to do this. I want you to read silently. Cheaters, I know there's cheaters out there. Don't be cheating on this. Don't read it out loud. Read it silently and then put your answer in the chat box. You have 10 seconds. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Yeah, non-native speakers cannot get that. Oh, thanks for putting that in chat box. No one got that, Susan. No one did. Can you believe that? I mean, really, recess is going to be like a rainy day. Everyone's in the classroom. Yeah. A dark rain cloud is the answer. We want you to think about how you could quickly respond when it was read aloud versus when you were trying to silently read. Think about the use of text to speech. And then play that game. We went from automatic to manual. When we're doing this session in person, we're laughing at each other when we're trying to decode those words, and we get embarrassed. Even adults are getting embarrassed trying to play mad gaps because you have that decoding and you're fumbling through it. That's how our students feel when decoding's the barrier. And then I just put you from automatic to manual, and we do get embarrassed. We're like, oh my gosh, I don't want to read this out loud. And that's how our students feel. I'm going to wrap up this section here, just saying that we have some students who look like this. Some disabilities look like this. We have an individual with a cane. When we have a student with a cane or blindness, low vision, we are so accommodating. Do you need Braille? Do you need audio? What do you need? What do you need technographics to access curriculum? It's not even questioned. We have a student in a wheelchair. All of a sudden our environment switched around, making sure our student can get anywhere they need to in the classroom. Maybe we have a situational temporary disability, someone with crutches. All of a sudden, they're getting all this assistance without even question. But some disabilities we cannot see. And just because we can't see a disability such as dyslexia does not mean it's less crucial for them to have access to the curriculum. And a student uses a wheelchair. Some of our students use text to speech. Okay, shaming readers. Just so you know that Kershaw and PhD believes that shame of this associated with reading disabilities often matches in intensity the shame experienced over incest. Friends, this stems way beyond accessing the curriculum. This really falls deep into the core of a child when they are struggling readers, and we have the power not to be that lid, ensuring that they have access to accommodations so they can show you what they know. But it's not always obvious. We challenge you to just, if you look up, we gave you a link to this universal protocol for accommodations of reading, it will immediately show a student what accommodations, whether silent reading using a human audio or text reader, and it gives you a beautiful chart like this that will tell you if a student will benefit from what accommodation. So look through these graphs. You have access to this. Dive deep. Reach out to us if you want to know more about UPAR, but definitely reach out to Don Johnson and Text Help, because it's a great a data program. So just so you know, 74% of children who are poor readers in 3rd grade remain poor readers in the 9th grade. We can empower our students, right? Our 1st place looks super sad because 3rd place is just like jumping for joy. We have to give our students an opportunity to place, even if it's 3rd.
Wow, that game is always amazing. And every time I do it, I forget what the answer is and I still can't do it the 2nd time. So thank you, Kelly. To summarize this 3rd myth, AT is not cheating, right? Assistive technology is an option that provides both access to learning and agency as a learner. And whenever we talk about this, I just always want to add that assistive technology sometimes can be seen as kind of like an unfortunate bummer that, well, because the student can't read it on their own, they can use AT, I guess. And it would be a great day if someday they didn't need that assistive technology. But it makes me think about myself and any technology that I use. Like every time I leave, no matter where I go, I put the maps on my phone because I get lost super easily. I never get in my car or get out of my car and think, I hope next time I don't need to use my phone for directions, right? I just accept that for me, that phone is power. It's access to anywhere I want to go, and it's power as a driver. Assistive technology is not something we hope learners grow out of or can be weaned off of. Assistive technology becomes part of that learner's experience of being a learner and all of the rights that are, come with it. So I just think that's an important piece there, Kelly, to remember. Universal design for learning is this framework that helps us to remember that we can make designs more flexible, more customizable, more able to be right-sized for all learners, each and every student. And there are lots of ways of learning more about UDL if this is something that you'd like to dig into, or maybe you already know, but we welcome you to join us at future CAST events to learn more.
Absolutely. And I'm already looking forward to it.
All right, so this is a summary of what we talked about, the myths and the ways that we hope that universal design for learning can help us to debunk those myths. We're going to leave them on the screen and I'll just state them simply again. What questions are arising in you? We have a few minutes and we'll stick around for a few beyond that. What questions about these myths? What reflections do you want to share? Actually, maybe we should just say, I'll say them quickly and then we'll go to your closing, Kelly. So the first myth again, that, we have to, students have to be ready to be able to access literacy instruction. No, we can use UDL to make literacy instruction ready for students. That there are prerequisite skills for literacy, using speech as one of them. No, there are no prerequisites to literacy instruction. Just knowing that you're here in this learning moment is enough. And that's assistive technology is cheating, right? It's not. Assistive technology is a means for people to have access and power in their learning environments.
And so we really like this image of Mr. Rogers. He is feeding fish in the aquarium. Someone tweeted this out, Amy Sedaris, and accessibility does matter. Access for all learners does matter. So this is what she stated. When the world seems dark, I remind myself that Mr. Rogers once got a letter from a blind girl who wrote that she heard him say he owned fish, but was worried that they weren't being fed. So at the end of every following show, he'd narrate, I'm feeding the fish just for her. He made that one change, making that experience accessible for all. we can be the change, right? Think about the lid, think about high expectation. It absolutely does matter. And just like Mr. Rogers here, we just made that one change. Whether you leave here today and have a conversation with one colleague and share some of these resources that could really help shift that mindset for access for all of our learners, or just empower students and help them find the way that they learn. Explain to them, oh my goodness, you're a strong ear reader. Try, Texas, oh my gosh, look at what a strong ear reader you are. And kind of take that stigma off that accessibility is a bad thing, when really, I love how Susan said it's just a part of you as a learner.
Hey, Kelly, there's one question that you might be able to answer here. It says, can you suggest AT tips for facilitating executive function for students with ADHD?
Oh, I love that, friend. Send me an email or pop that out on social media, because my first question is always going to be, what's the goal? So when we think about that goal first, and then we can share a ton of supports that you might consider. So please reach out to me anytime. And this is where you have all of the resources on here to please go through those slides. This is a tip sheet from Cass for creating accessible education materials. We just want to thank you so much for being here. On behalf of Susan and I'm just going to say that this has been so much fun. You've been so engaging. We're going to save that chat and make sure that it's shared with their recording as well.
Did you just say we're going to save the chat and add it to the digital handout?
Oh, I did not, but yes, I did.
Yes. Okay. We're going to do that too. Yes.
Let's do that. And we're going to go out with, we have 86 people leaving here. We're just going to, thank you.